Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show, the horror movie podcast where we talk about films off the Rotten Tomatoes 200 Best Horror Movies of All Time list. My name is Clay, and with me, as always, is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
Oh, I'm good. I'm just trying to destroy my voice so that I can sound like a demon.
Well, apparently, what you need to do for that is you need to start gargling raw eggs and chain smoking cigarettes and drinking a shitload of whiskey. And
I mean, that last one sounds fun, but the other two, maybe not.
Yeah, well, you drink enough whiskey, the other two are just, you don't even notice them anymore.
You burn off all your taste buds, and then you can gargle those raw eggs like a champ.
Yeah. It's like, I always say, the most, I was going to say that's what Rocky did before he drank all those eggs, is he would just chain smoke 4 or 5 cigarettes. And it just reminded me that the first time I saw this movie, the thing I found the most disturbing was the scene where the doctor just lights up a cigarette in the hospital. The doctor lights up a cigarette.
Yes. In the hospital.
Different
not
times.
Not outside the hospital.
No, different times we lived in. Can you believe that you used to be able to smoke on a plane?
I know, like, we're old enough that when we were small children, there were lots of places you could still smoke.
Mm-hmm.
And even still, it blows my mind. Like, even where I live and work, because I work on a college campus that's a smoke-free campus, like, you don't even see people standing outside of buildings smoking in where I'm at. So it always throws me, especially watching movies like this where everyone is smoking all the time. I'm kind of surprised Reagan doesn't bust out a pack.
Yes, Ronald Reagan does not smoke in this movie. Of course, we are talking about... The movie we're talking about today is 1973's The Exorcist. And before we get into that, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, which is that we might have... I think we have a contender for worst placement on the list. I think this has bumped The Shining off the top spot of most egregious misranking. Because The Exorcist, which is routinely listed by many people as the scariest movie they've ever seen. It's always in like the top 10 best horror films of all time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
On our list, it is number 126.
What?
Yes.
What? Wait, where is The Shining now?
The Shining is 77.
Okay. I mean, still not correct, but better. 126?
126. It is considerably lower than Zombieland, than Shaun of the Dead, than The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, than Eraserhead, Attack the Block, Halloween 2018. Yeah, it's a baffling placement.
That's upsetting.
Yeah. It has an 84% Rotten Tomatoes score with an 87% audience score.
Huh. That's actually kind of lower than I expected for both of those.
It's lower, but it's closer. Like, I feel like a lot of times they end up being polar opposites of each other, but this one's like kind of in the pocket, and I don't know if that's... I don't know. These movies... I have to imagine the reason that this is so low is just because there is so much having been written about it over the years that the rating just isn't... It has evened out more than some of the things that have fewer reviews, because I'm assuming that's how the algorithm works. I don't know why it does that, but...
Right, or like it's so overhyped that at this point there's enough people who've kind of said, like, everybody always said this was the scariest movie, and I watched it, and I thought it was boring and dumb.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask you.
Out there.
I was going to ask you, have you seen this before? Is that your feeling about this movie?
Yes, as everyone knows, I think this movie is boring and dumb. No, I love this movie so much.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember when I first saw it. I have a feeling, and my mom listens to this podcast, so hi, Mom.
Hello,
she
Mrs.
will correct
Amanda.
me. Yes, that is her Christian name.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling this was one of the movies that it's not that we weren't allowed to watch it, but I feel like in my family, my extended family especially, it would have been considered like poor taste because I come from a very, very Catholic family.
Mm-hmm. You
And I
have
think that,
you have a Father Marin in your family. No, a Father Karras in your family, don't you? Basically.
I mean, he's more of a Father Marin, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. There you go.
My Uncle Robert, a tall, gangly man who has traveled the world doing many interesting things
Oh,
and
there
is a
you go.
priest.
Excellent.
Yeah. No exorcisms that I know of, though.
Well, not yet.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. I my introduction to this movie, I think I got like I don't want to say the perfect introduction, but
Ooh.
I hadn't seen this before the 2000 re-release, and it was kind of one that I was just getting into horror movies and stuff, and so right around this time, and I was going to church every week, and this movie came back out into theaters, and the pastor of my church actually during his sermon pleaded with people not to go see it.
Oh, wow.
Because of its content and because of its I don't know, blasphemous nature. I don't know. It was something that was one of those things was like, oh shit, this must mean business. And then I think
kind of the perfect way to convince every person in the congregation under the age of like 30 to go see it immediately.
Oh yes. I didn't end up seeing it in the theater, but I did end up seeing it ironically with a bunch of my friends from church. So and it was I thought it was great.
Perfect.
Like it's one of those ones where I think the first time I saw it I liked it, but it didn't blow me away because it had been hyped up so much, and there's talk of all the things that happen in this movie and spoken in very hushed tones.
Right, in the like apocryphal stories about people like fainting and running out of the theater.
Right.
And that kind of stuff.
I have one of those in my own family. My mother went to see this movie with my Uncle Stephen, and apparently the scene. He's not the only person this happened to. This apparently was pretty common. The scene where Reagan gets the thing in her neck at the hospital and the blood starts spurting out.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, my Uncle Stephen either did faint or almost fainted.
I don't blame him for that one.
Yeah.
They do a really good job making that look realistic, and little tiny Linda Blair looks genuinely in distress during it. I can see why that freaked people out.
Yeah. And so, you have all that stuff kind of behind it before you're sitting down to watch it. And it's always going to, it's very much roller coastery type thing where it's like the roller coaster seems really daunting and then you do it. And it's like, that wasn't too bad.
Yeah. I think also if you see this for the first time when you're a lot younger, some of the things for the first half of the movie will probably seem either confusing and or boring to you.
Sure.
Like they did to me the first time or two I saw this movie. It was always like fast forward through the first hour and then things start to pick up, and it's not until I got a little bit older and sort of started to understand a little bit more of like what the heck is happening at the beginning and why it's important that I could like appreciate it more.
Yeah. And I think I came away with it like liking it but not being blown away with it, and it wasn't until I had gone back and revisited it probably I don't know, a year or so, a couple years later, that I really clicked with it and was like, okay, this is legitimately very good. This isn't just like a great scary movie. This is a legitimately good movie. And a movie we are going to take a quick break and then come back and talk about. So, be back in a second.
Something beyond comprehension is happening to a little girl on this street, in this house. A man has been sent for as a last resort to try and save her.
Okay. The Exorcist, 1973, directed by William Friedkin, the late, unfortunately, recently late, great William Friedkin, written by William Peter Blatty, adapted from his novel, starring Ellen Burstyn, Linda Blair, Lee J. Cobb, Jason Miller, Death himself. Jesus, I fucked that up. I was going to say Death himself, Max von Sydow, but he plays chess against Death. He isn't Death. But he is the voice of Vigo the Carpathian in Ghostbusters 2. I was going to put that in, but I didn't want to do two voice things in a row because the last thing I have here is, and the immortal voice of Mercedes McCambridge.
Ah, yeah.
Amanda, what happens in The Exorcist?
A girl gets possessed by an evil spirit. I told you I was going to do it.
Yeah, that is the Amazon synopsis of The Exorcist, is a girl gets possessed by an evil spirit. I mean, it's not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much all you need to know to go into this movie. You're either interested in that plot or you're not.
Yeah. What's the Amazon summary for like Dracula? Is it Eastern European man visits London? Anyway.
God, I hope so. Well, Clay, some things you'll find in this movie include...
Yes.
Captain Howdy, a.k.a. Pazuzu.
Yes. Pazuzu is a great name that I'm glad nobody says in the movie because it's very silly.
It just makes me... Did you watch Futurama?
Not really.
There's an episode in Futurama where one of the Dr. Farnsworth just shakes his fist and yells Pazuzu as a demon flies away. It's very good.
There's a wrestling tag team, an indie tag team called Team Pazuzu.
Nice.
That has,
nice, I'm for it.
At least one of them has the subliminal shot of the demon face on his knee pad.
Nice. That's cool. You'll also find a staple of every woman's wardrobe, the sleep halter top.
Yes. I don't want to be presumptuous, but that seemed like something one might wear for the benefit of another person more than to be comfortable at sleeping. But I could be wrong.
I don't know why anyone would wear that, to be honest.
Well, sometimes your front parts get cold and your back parts get warm.
Your back parts get hot, and that's why you only need half a shirt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why everybody in sleepaway camp wore those shirts.
That's actually weirdly true.
All the men in New Jersey in the early 80s had very hot stomachs.
You'll also find the Walt Disney version of the Ho Chi Minh story.
Yeah, I think the strangest bit of this movie, and the part that even to this day, I've seen this a number of times, the thing that always stands out to me as being the most superfluous is the fact that Chris McNeil is filming a movie in Washington. Yes, yeah.
It's a movie within a movie plot, and the movie has really nothing to do with anything.
Yeah, you only get one scene of her on set, and you get some of the other supporting characters are crew members. There's Burke Dennings, who's the director, who ends up Reagan throws out the window. Is he also the one that Reagan says she thinks that her mother has the hots for?
Yes.
I don't get that at all, because that guy is a drunk who is not attractive.
I think it's that he has a thing for Chris.
Oh, okay.
And she's nice to him. And so everybody kind of is like, I mean, if you like him, and she's like, I mean, we're friends.
Because this time,
just a nice person.
This time I thought he was the one who Reagan says you're going to die up there too.
Oh no, that's the astronaut.
He's an astronaut?
Yeah.
I completely missed that. Anyway, he seems like a better boyfriend is my point. He seems like a much more handsome guy who's got...
But he's going to die up there, Clay. All right. You'll also find in this movie the real-life inspiration for the movie Cruising.
Yes. This is one of the more fascinating aspects of lore surrounding the movie The Exorcist, and I was very lucky enough to. I'm sure I've told the story before, but it is actually relevant now. I was very lucky enough to see a screening of William Friedkin's Sorcerer, which was his follow-up movie to The Exorcist that completely bombed, even though it's a fantastic movie, and I highly recommend everybody see it. And he was there doing a Q&A afterward. And it was, I've been to a couple of these Q&As, and they're always kind of weird. People are always asking kind of weird questions. And at this one, you would think, okay, Exorcist, probably getting a bunch of Exorcist questions, maybe get some French Connection questions. We had just watched Sorcerer, maybe some questions about Sorcerer. Almost every question was about cruising, to the point where he actually stopped the Q&A and said, "Do you guys just want me to tell you about cruising?" And everybody started clapping. And
my God.
And so he's like, "Okay, here's the story of cruising." And so he told the story, which from his point of view is that they wanted to make this movie Cruising, which is a book about murders in the gay community. And they brought it to him, and he wasn't really interested in it. And then he saw a news report about this guy named Paul Bateson, who had been arrested for the murder of a guy named Addison Verrill. And Friedkin realized he knew Paul Bateson. Paul Bateson is in The Exorcist and has lines in The Exorcist as the tech who helps perform the angiography, which is the thing where they put the thing into her neck.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of rattled by this. And so he actually went to Rikers Island and talked to Paul and talked to him about it. And apparently the other thing was that there was another string of killings in the gay community that was happening where I think there was 6 murders, unsolved murders, and there were body parts that were washing up in the river, like the Hudson River, in plastic bags. And so this was going on, and Bateson had been arrested for the murder of this one guy. And apparently the bags that they had found the body parts in, on the seams of the bag, said like property of New York Medical or something, which was the place where Bateson worked. And so the cops pinned all of these other murders on Bateson. And so when Friedkin went to talk to him, he was like, "Did you do this?" And he said, "I only remember killing one person." And so according to Friedkin,
a very confidence-inspiring statement.
Yes. According to Friedkin, he says Bateson was offered a lesser sentence if he confessed to the other murders, which I think is what happened. If not, I believe those murders have gone unsolved. And
yeah, I don't think he ever actually confessed. I think they're still cold cases.
Yeah. And so after talking with Bateson and learning that Bateson frequented a lot of the gay clubs in New York and kind of getting into these other murders that had been going on in this small community, he reappraised the Cruising novel and decided to make the movie Cruising, which is another very interesting movie that's worth watching and worth discussing. Because, like, man, talk about a movie that could never get made today, at least not by someone like Billy Friedkin. I think it's a really interesting movie, and it has a lot of stuff in it that I think other movies have taken from. Like, I think there's a lot of Cruising in Zodiac. But man, yeah, it's one of those movies where it got a lot of flack for depicting the actions and this gay culture in a certain way. But Friedkin was like, I didn't make any of this up. Like he was friends with the guys who owned these clubs. And so he actually went to these clubs and was just shooting in the clubs. And so everybody who's in these movies doing the stuff they're doing is all just stuff he got, like, basically documentary footage of. And so it's a really interesting document of a very specific point in time that just I mean, I don't know this for sure. I feel like it probably doesn't exist like that anymore, especially once, AIDS came out and everything. When AIDS came out on DVD.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyway, we still have some things you'll find in this movie,
There's
Clay.
the point is, there's a real-life murderer, possible serial killer in The Exorcist. Anyway, Go ahead.
You'll also find priest self-defenestration.
Yes. And what does that word mean? Because I didn't know.
Oh, just chucking something out a window.
Yes.
Yes. You'll find one of the top 10 single greatest shots in movie history.
Yeah. There's the shot where Merrin gets out of the car, which is the classic shot used in every promotional image of The Exorcist, has to be top 10, one of the most recognizable and iconic shots in any movie. It's a perfect shot.
Yeah, it's so eerie. It's so good.
I believe, I'm not 100% sure because I didn't read through all of the 150 trivia bits, but I believe that I think that they built the facade of the front of that house. Like it was an actual house that they built out to get that composition for that shot. Like because if you look at the building's a little weird because it's like a house, but it's got this flat brick part up top,
and it's
then
kind
the
of got
window.
the gate in the front. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they fabricated that for the movie.
And last but certainly not least, you'll find pretty good parenting, actually.
All things considered, probably some of the best parenting we've seen.
Yeah, I mean,
except for her dad. Her dad seems to be a scumbag.
Yeah.
But...
Well, we don't actually see him or what kind of parent he is, good or bad. We're assuming bad because he's absentee. But Ellen Burstyn's character Chris is, for all intents and purposes, seems a really great, caring mother.
Yeah, and I think that might be a good place to jump into the actual discussion of the movie, because the thing that really makes this work, on top of everything else of all the flashy stuff, is the time spent with Regan and her mother, and the amazing performance from Ellen Burstyn. And I think there's another way you could go with this, where she's not that great of a mom, and she, being an actress and being busy all the time, she's kind of brushing Regan to the side. But that's really not how they're portrayed. They're portrayed as having a pretty loving relationship,
which I think is like really refreshing. Not only because we specifically have done so many movies with questionable parenting, but because I think that kind of parent-child relationship where there's already tension in it has become so ubiquitous it's almost stereotype.
Right, yeah.
And it's sort of like a shorthand way of like creating conflict and adding tension without really having to earn any of it. You just say like, oh yeah, a teenage daughter and her mom are butting heads because that's what teenagers and their moms do. Mm-hmm. And instead in this, it's like, no, they actually really enjoy one another and they have a lot of fun together and they clearly genuinely care for one another. It's actually kind of great to see, not only because it's a breath of fresh air, but also it makes what then happens between them so much more awful.
Right.
Like once Regan starts really showing signs of possession and does such charming things as cramming her mother's face into her bloody crotch.
Yes.
It really drives home how twisted and fucked up that is.
I bet Freud doesn't have a word for that. Maybe he does. I don't know. Yeah, I think you also get great bits that I feel are very authentic, where after that scene where Regan is like, "Are you going to marry Mr. Dennings or whatever?" And she's like, "No, I love your father. I'll always love your father." And like the next scene is her on the phone being like, "Tell him he's a piece of shit because he won't call his fucking daughter." Which seems very authentic.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I think another way where it emphasizes that she is a good mom, because in that second scene you're talking about where she's been trying to get the father on the phone because it's Reagan's birthday, and it's like, wish your daughter a happy birthday, you piece of shit. She doesn't know that Reagan's listening.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Reagan, the way the scene is shot, in the foreground we see Reagan kind of leaning just outside of a doorway on the wall, and her mom is like down the hall in the next room with the door open on the phone. And she's getting upset but she doesn't realize where Reagan is. So, like, when Chris talks about the father to Reagan, or when she knows Reagan's around, she doesn't shit talk him.
Right, yeah.
It's when she doesn't think she's there, so she can kind of let loose and be like, this asshole, I hate this guy.
Yeah.
But she's a good mom. She doesn't want to put her daughter in the middle of it, and she's trying not to sour the relationship between them, which I think is a nice subtle way of showing that, like, yeah, she's human and she loses her temper, but she's trying to do what's best for her kid.
Yeah. And I think what's nice is they do this without drawing attention to it, because every other possession movie or poltergeist movie, I feel like, requires somebody to call this out. But it's the thing where, like, anytime you watch a documentary or something on these things, poltergeist or whatever, they're always like, the perfect age for supernatural activity to pop up is a girl who's going through puberty. And, like, they always call that shit out. And in this one, they don't call it out, but they do follow along that track where Reagan is in this certain point of her life where she's very much in transition and clearly has a lot she's dealing with, even though, you know, whether or not it's explicitly portrayed or not. And I saw Friedkin talking about it, and he said one of the things that they did was, as she starts getting worse, before she gets, you know, obviously demonically possessed, they tried to set up little bits, places where she could have learned the behavior that she's doing. So, for instance, like after that scene where her mother is calling her ex-husband a piece of shit or a fucking bastard, is when Reagan starts using a lot more swear words and becoming a lot more angry and like that kind of thing, where she's actually kind of taking on these negative things that she's coming across as someone who is the child of a divorced family who probably is moving around a lot. She's on the cover of a magazine, like a tabloid. And it's a really nice, subtle way to portray Reagan as someone who is very much in flux and, in the tradition of these stories, might be open to, I don't mean open like she's going to choose it, but just like she's an open vessel for the kind of demon that would come in and take her over.
Yeah, like she's sort of uniquely vulnerable because of the place she's at in her life. Because, like, her identity has been destabilized by the fact that she's growing up and she doesn't know who she's growing into, but she's probably not the little kid that her mom still sees her as. Like,
right.
There is that when they show her the magazine cover, Chris says, "I don't like that picture of you. You look too mature."
Right, yeah.
And it's this, like, very kind of funny thing, because I feel like we've all had those family members who are like, I think especially when you're a girl and especially when you're younger, there's this sort of accidental policing of what you look like. Like, you know, you look too grown up for your age kind of thing. And it's like a very relatable moment and very much something you can understand why a parent would say that. Because they're, you know, she's looking at Reagan and still seeing her little girl, her little kid.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, it kind of goes to this, depending on how you look at her, she's not anymore, really.
Right, yeah. She would be right in the crosshairs of everybody who works at sleepaway camp.
Yeah. But, you know, I have not read the book The Exorcist.
I was going to ask if you had. I would be interested. I'm thinking I might, just for the hell of it.
Yeah, I
right
would
now,
really like to.
On mic, page 1. It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Anyway.
I wonder how much the author of the book, is he also a William? Is he
William Peter Blatty? Yes.
Yes, I kept wanting to call him Peter Blatty, but I was like, I'm pretty sure he's a William. I wonder how much in the book that sort of puberty trope appears, because I get the vibe that Blatty probably wouldn't really give a shit about that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like he he's very devoutly religious, and I think for him it's more of like using a character like Reagan. It's not that she's in this transitional period in her life or she's changing emotionally or physically. I think she is like a symbol of purity and innocence to him.
Yeah.
And this is more of a like, look what the devil can do. Look what evil can do. Like demons and Satan are real, and they can corrupt even the most seemingly incorruptible amongst us, an innocent child.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think that's more the interest for him than the like growing up and puberty kind of subtext.
Yeah, I don't think you're probably not wrong, because I feel like everyone who I've seen talk about it, or Blatty and Friedkin and other places, say that the movie's not about Reagan, it's about Karis, and the demon's target isn't Reagan, the demon's target is Karis. and so I could see him leaning more into that battle than the teenage girl stuff, because as an older Catholic man, he might not have the same frame of reference for 13-year-old girl stuff.
Well, yeah, because I do think, and I think especially back then, the line between childhood and adulthood was a lot sharper in a lot of ways. Like nowadays I feel like we have all of these like categories and subcategories for youth and young adulthood. Like you're a kid, and then you're a tween, and then you're a teen, and then you're like college age where you're a young adult. You're not really an adult yet, but you're definitely not a kid. And then you're out of college and you're sort of an adult now, but you're not really.
Yeah.
Like we break it down into these much more like nuanced buckets and transitional periods in life. But I think, for much more of modern understanding, an 11 or 12-year-old is just a child. That's just a kid.
Yeah. Not to Ted Nugent. I can't, that came across my desk the other day, and I had forgotten about that. And it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about the fact that Ted Nugent had a family sign over conservatorship of their 13-year-old daughter to him so he could have sex with her. So just want to make sure everybody out there knows that, because he's a piece of shit.
Put that
anyway,
back in there. Yep.
Yeah, I think the stuff with them is great. What's really funny, sort of, is Blatty was actually more well known as a comedy writer before this. He had worked with Blake Edwards, who did the Pink Panther, and you and I know Blake Edwards as the auteur behind what the hell is the name of that movie with where they switch bodies after the guy gets killed?
Oh, The Switch.
The Switch. One of the more
you almost had it.
Yeah, I know. One of the more batshit
bodies.
crazy movies I've seen in a while. But yeah, so this was, I guess he was saying when he first wrote this, people were expecting it to be a comedy and were very much surprised that it wasn't.
That's really interesting. That reminds me of the current modern day incarnation of that kind of person, which is Craig Mazin, the guy who did the Chernobyl miniseries, and more recently The Last of Us, who was originally kind of known as like the script doctor for like sequels and trilogies of comedy movies.
He did The Hangover, didn't he? Is that him?
Yeah, he did The Hangover like 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People contain multitudes, I guess.
Like Reagan.
Yeah.
Hey.
What I think one of the things that makes this work really well is Friedkin's shooting style, which is very documentary influenced. He's got this great ability to, and he does this in The French Connection, he does this in Sorcerer, he does it in Cruising. He's got this great ability to shoot a fictional movie that has documentary feeling to it, but doesn't feel like it's trying to be a documentary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think coupled with that, he gets very, what's the word, naturalistic
Yes.
performances out of actors. I think he does a really good job of keeping people grounded in a level of realism, even when things around them are going really far off the rails.
Yeah, he was a huge stickler for realism. And the movie starts, of course, with Merrin in Iraq doing on a archaeological expedition, which they shot in Nineveh. Yes, which they shot at an actual archaeological dig in Nineveh. So I mean, you can't buy that kind of production design. But like a lot of most of the stuff in Iraq is just on the street filming. It's not actors. It's just
so cool. Max
von Sydow interacting with the people in the town, in the marketplace. He talks a lot about finding. He calls them grace notes, like little bits that aren't in the script that you just stumble into that really kind of bring certain scenes to life. And he talked about how the scene where Merrick just walks through that sort of I don't know if it's not quite underground, but it's a little market that is enclosed with the sun coming through, and it's just like a beautiful little sequence.
Yeah,
and that was not something they planned. He just saw that place and he's like, "All right, Max, walk through here," and it's just a nice little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? My brain's gone dry. It's just like a little. It's a little bit of gives a little bit of extra juice to the environment and stuff. And he continues that through the movie with the hospital stuff, where most of the people in those sequences are actual doctors, and even in the church stuff, most of those people are actual priests. They're not actors, and it does add this really interesting layer of reality to it that, I mean, especially in horror movies, especially at this time, you are not getting.
Yeah, wasn't even Father Karras's mother, wasn't she just kind of they sort of stumbled upon her in in a Greek restaurant?
Yeah.
She was just sort of serendipitously found.
Even Jason Miller, this was his first movie, and I believe he was more well known as a playwright than he was as an actor. And I guess they had already cast the part for Karras. It was going to be an actor named Stacy Keach, who you might, if you don't know him, you'd probably know him if you saw him. He's kind of a Powers Booth looking guy.
Oh.
And I guess Miller got his hands on the script, and he talked to Friedkin had gone to see his play or something, and he said, "You have to cast me in this because this character is me." Because I guess he was, I don't know if he was actually a priest or if he was studying to be a priest, but he was someone who had been struggling with their own faith for a long time. And Friedkin was like, "No, I mean, we already cast the role. I'm sorry." And he's like, "No, you don't understand. You have to let me play this part." And so finally he said, "Okay, we'll do a screen test. It's not going to for anything. We already cast the role. This is just to do it." And so Friedkin shot a screen test of Jason Miller doing the Catholic Mass. And he said he said something to the effect of, once I finished shooting it and I saw the dailies, I turned to the next person next to me and said, "Someone call Stacy Keach and tell him he's fired," or something like that.
Oh shit.
But what they ended up doing is they ended up paying him his whole salary to have him walk away so they could hire Jason Miller to play this role.
Wow. I wonder how he feels after that, when this movie became such a huge phenomenon. Do you feel, I mean, obviously you feel a level of regret, like that should have been me, but at different points in your career, are you kind of like, man, I'm sort of glad I didn't take it, because then you'd be so pigeonholed into that role, like everyone would see you as Father Karras.
Yeah. I don't think he would have been that good, honestly, because Stacy Keach has a little bit too much gristle on him. Like he does kind of fall in that same category as like a Powers Booth or an Ian McShane. I'm just pulling Deadwood actors off the top of my head because I'm watching the show. Like, for instance, he's in Escape from L.A. in the role that Lee Van Cleef played in the original. Lee Van Cleef being the classic Western, squinty-eyed tough guy. So Stacy Keach has like that kind of energy, which I don't think is Father Karras energy at all.
Yeah, which is interesting. Like I want to talk a little bit about Father Karras while we're on him, because I find him such a fascinating character. Like he is so gentle seeming. Like when he talks to Chris, even when he disagrees with her and upsets her and she starts kind of yelling at him, he never gets angry or upset back. He's like a very calm presence. He's very even keeled, even as he's going through this like deep crisis of faith and this deep amount of grief over his mother dying in, kind of impoverished circumstances. And I don't know. I find him also, even the fact that he's Greek, but he's a Catholic priest. And not a Greek Orthodox priest is really interesting. So it's
I know
is, not to.
Sorry, I know the mother is the actress is Greek, but I guess I always just read them as Italian, but that's probably just me being Mediterranean racist, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, at least you admit it on a recording that's going to go out into the public.
Listen, I love the food, but the people are trash, is what I'm saying.
Spoken like a true McCormick. But like that's interesting because I don't pretend to know what percentage of Greek people are Catholic. I know that there are Greek people who are Catholic, but I think it's more unusual. So you're kind of an outcast in your own community just based off of that.
Yeah.
And then he's a psychiatrist, and he talks to Chris about how he was sent to all these different schools. He name drops like Harvard and I think Johns Hopkins and a couple others. And so he's very like science based, but he's the psychiatrist for the other priests.
Right.
I don't know. I think he's like a character that's kind of full of contradictions, and he's a boxer too. Like there's pictures of him like as though he kind of like won boxing matches in his mother's apartment. So I don't know. He's a really fascinating character who's hard to figure out, and I think it makes his final role in the exorcism itself, I don't know, like almost harder to understand. Like he never really has a full I believe again moment.
Right.
Like he never, in fact, his faith is so shaken and his own like emotional and mental fortitude is so weakened that Father Marin's going to get rid of him. He's just like, get out. You can't handle this.
Right. Yeah.
I'll do it myself, which is against the exorcism rules, by the way.
Right.
You're supposed to have 2 priests, not just one.
Just in case one of them dies from a heart attack in the middle of it, like Marin does.
That's actually the reason.
Is it really?
Yeah. You have 2 priests in case one of them dies during during the ritual.
Yeah, you got to finish the ritual. That's the thing. The number one rule about magic rituals: you got to finish the ritual. Otherwise,
close all the doors you open.
Yep, exactly.
But yeah,
that's actually that phrase.
Has.
When every time someone closes a door, God opens a window, whatever it is. It's actually talking about exorcism rites in that instance.
But yeah, Karras never has a kind of relighting of his faith. In a weird way, you can sort of read what happens as him kind of giving up. Like,
yeah, that's like interesting.
He's out of options.
Yeah,
he's in like a desperate place, and he doesn't have the strength in his faith in God to be able to just cast the demon out. So he has to resort to this sort of like abominable choice of damning himself in order to save someone else because he can't do the full ritual.
Yeah, that is interesting because I feel like the popular reading of this at least the reading that is the counterpoint to, well, The Exorcist is a blasphemous movie that's about evil, is that it is about Karras who has lost his faith, finding it again, and good triumphing over evil. And I don't know, I'm kind of on the same page as you, where I don't know if I can 100% say that I agree with that, at least not in the way, I mean, we may as well, since we're kind of dancing around it, let's just get into the ending, because Friedkin and Blatty were very, they butted heads quite a bit about the ending, and like Friedkin did not know how to end the movie. And I understand, because I don't know how you, given all the things that you have set up and followed through in this movie, I feel like Karras all of a sudden just taking up the cross of his dead mentor, and with the light of God shining down on his head, saying the power of Christ compels you, and then the devil just goes away. It feels really cheap. You know, like that doesn't feel like in line with this movie at all. But and then on the other hand, it's tough to defend that ending as this being like this great triumph for good, when the thing that gets the demon out of her is Karras just beating the shit out of her.
Yeah, just like punching a child in the face.
I was joking around last night, because there's a new one coming out that David Gordon Green is doing. And David Gordon Green, he did the most recent Halloween trilogy, and he is one of the creators of Righteous Gemstones and Vice Principals with Danny McBride. And I was saying, man, if the priest in his Exorcist is Jesse Gemstone, sign me up, because the first thing he's doing is he's pulling a gun. You want to talk about possession? How about possession of a dangerous weapon, motherfucker? That'd be the first thing he says. And once he starts, he wouldn't even do the rites. He would just start beating her up. And apparently that works.
12-year-old child or not. But yeah, and also like the thing about faith is that you don't have evidence to back up your belief.
Right.
Once you have evidence, it stops being faith and just starts being fact. Like, so Karras has to kind of see not only Regan's behavior when she's being possessed, that doesn't even convince him. When Father Merrin shows up, Karras is still talking about multiple personality disorder and like medical symptoms and treatments, and Merrin's just like, no, there is no other personality. There's one, and it's a demon, and we're gonna get it out of her.
Right.
And so even seeing her sort of like overt symptoms isn't enough to convince him that something supernatural is happening here. It's not until they start doing the exorcism rites, and she's like channeling his dead mother, and she's levitating off the bed fully, and her head's turning on around backwards.
I'll tell you, the first time I saw this, the scariest shot in the movie was for me when Karras walks in and Regan has turned into his mother, and they have that light coming down. That like really freaked me out the first time I saw it.
For me, there's something about when she's sitting up in the bed and her head turns backwards and she's speaking in Burke's voice.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That one, when I first saw it, really got me. I think it's something about like the placement of her body. When that scene happens, like the way her legs are kind of stuck straight out on the bed, and then her head is turned around, like that image stayed with me for a long time.
Yeah, it's full of that stuff. Obviously. But yeah, it's I guess the ending, a place where Friedkin and Blatty disagreed quite a bit was originally Karras throws himself out the window while he's still possessed, and Blatty said no, we need to show that has control, and that Karras is choosing to do this, because otherwise it looks like the demon wins. And I don't disagree with him. I just don't know what it means based on the themes and stuff they've been playing with, that Karras has regained his own sense of self long enough to hurl himself out a window.
To self-defenestrate, if you will.
Yes.
It's also interesting because I
love that there's a word
think
for throwing something out a window.
I don't remember if it's a window specifically. I think it's an opening.
Either way.
Yeah, but it's throwing something through some sort of opening from a height, I believe, but I could be wrong.
That's actually the original name for basketball, was just defenestrations, team-based defenestration. But didn't catch on quite as much.
Basket defenestration.
That sounds like someone. Team-based or basket defenestration sounds like the medical examiner's, the coroner report for like a murder victim or something. Well, they died of basket defenestration. Oh my God.
Or like some weird like lumbar injury or something.
Yeah. Multiple defenestrations to the upper thorax. Because it's a bug, I guess.
I think the ending is having Karis take the demon into himself and then have that last moment of self-control and then killing himself, I think is supposed to be read as like kind of an ultimate sacrifice. Not only in the sense of he's losing his life, obviously, but he's given up salvation for his immortal soul because A, he allowed a demon to possess him, but also B, if he's the one in control, he's committing suicide, and suicides don't go to heaven in like very traditional Christian belief systems. Like a suicide is a sin against God because you're taking away the life God gave you, and that's a sin, and therefore you don't get to go to, you know, eternal paradise. I think in some Christian constructions you go to a version of purgatory, and in others you just go to hell.
Well, they actually have a sidestep around that as well, which makes things a little bit more continuously confusing. The scene where Father Dyer is with him as he's dying on the ground, he's giving him the last rites, and apparently the fact that he has enough strength to like squeeze Dyer's hand is, on the commentary, Friedkin was saying that is indication that he is
like competent enough to
and that he has what's the fucking word I'm looking for? He's not absolving himself. He's confessing his sins, basically, whatever the word is there. So he's actually being active in his absolution. You know what I mean?
Got it. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. I wonder if in real life Catholicism, if that would stand up. I imagine it would.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen the rule book.
It's a very long rule book.
Yeah. Lots of names.
Yeah.
I never got past
so-and-so begat so-and-so.
I tried to read the Bible twice, and both times I stopped at the name section. I feel like the name section is in there specifically to weed out the people who aren't gonna take this seriously.
Yeah. As soon as you get through that section, it says, now that all the weaklings are gone.
Yes. We
can get down to the real business. Here's how you live forever.
But before we do that, here's a bunch of cool action sequences that take place in Israel.
Right. Some of them in Nineveh.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's it's an ending that I think you can really kind of take your own interpretation of.
Sure.
Because part of me feels like, I don't know if that's by design or if it's just because they don't entirely know what their ending means, that they're kind of just like, yeah. I find it to be in line with the way a lot of the rest of this movie plays, which is I think even now still can be disorienting because Friedkin's not really giving you he's not really holding your hand for much of this movie. So there's a lot of like time and environment or location jumping that he is not telling you it's happening. So, for instance,
Yeah.
it took me a long time to realize that Karis's mother lives in New York. They never say it's New York. They just show that it's New York because of the subway system and like the brownstones that she lives in. But they never talk about the fact that I think maybe once they mention that she lives in New York, like offhandedly after she's died or something. But
right. Like, oh, Father Karras had to travel to New York. His mother
Right.
died or something like that.
But they're not calling that out really to tell you that they're changing locations. It just seems like, well, we met Karras in D.C. I guess he
Right.
must still be in D. And your brain isn't really, unless you're really paying attention, your brain's not really registering the fact that he's just gone to New York for the weekend.
Right.
And there's a lot of that in there. Like when they get into the hospital stuff, I think one of the things that's so freaky about the hospital stuff is they're not stopping to tell you what they're doing to her. They just show it to you. And
Right.
this time I noticed that there's a certain something about the medical tests that they're running feels almost ceremonial in the same way that the exorcism does at the end. The thing that stood out to me the most was, I don't know if it's the MRI machine. I don't know what the hell it is. The one that's like really loud and like spinning around her head.
Yeah, I think that's a version of like an MRI.
An early
I'm pretty
MRI,
sure.
yeah. I was looking at that and it just like it registered in my head as like almost a pagan ritual. Like they would show in like a movie about voodoo or something where someone is chanting over someone's body, shaking like
Yeah.
a bone necklace or something. Like in that moment, it felt as silly and pagan to me as anything else would. And it's
Right, and probably from Reagan's point of view, either one of those options or the exorcism itself they're all going to be equally incomprehensible to her.
Yeah.
Because like you said, no one's like stopping to explain, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's the result that we're hoping to see. Like, she's just put under the power of these adults and then has to just kind of lay there and allow these things to happen to her.
right. Yeah. It's there's that stuff seems like as much of an exorcism as the actual exorcism does.
Yeah, and I have to say that like what is she has like an angiogram, an arteriogram or something with the blood spurting out and they have to kind of insert something.
It's an angiography, I believe it's called.
Oh. So like this summer I had to have an arthrogram MRI on my shoulder where they injected dye into my shoulder and then stuck me in an MRI machine and the dye allowed them to see more of whatever the hell was happening in there.
What Arthur was doing?
And
What Arthur was doing?
Yes, exactly. Arthur, the little man who lives in my mouth. No, but I thought that was kind of daunting and uncomfortable and scary. And then seeing the 1973 version of that, but also on your brain,
Yeah.
I was just like, yeah, I can see why people fainted during this part of the movie.
Yeah. And I think that whole sequence, if you are a younger person and have or don't have a certain set of life experience, I think that whole section can come off as kind of boring. And it's like, oh, get to the, it was a demon movie,
Yeah.
But I think once you have been in a situation where there's something wrong with you and no one can figure out what it is, or more importantly, if you have a loved one who's in that situation, that stuff gets so much more tense and so much more trying on your psyche to go through,
Yeah, because there's the feeling of helplessness
Yeah.
and confusion. You really, even if things have been explained to you, if you've never had to go through something like that before, like people can tell you, like when I had this procedure done on my shoulder, it was explained to me like 4 times. Like my PT doctor explained it to me, my orthopedic doctor explained it to me, they explained it to me when I got in there, and then everybody as they were doing the different steps was telling me what they were doing and explaining kind of what was happening. And it was still really daunting and terrifying and kind of hard to hold all of this information in your mind when you're going through something that's that tense and stressful. So I think especially when it has to do with the human brain, it really adds another level of terror, because it's kind of like they keep telling her don't move, and
Right.
you think like, well, if she moves, is she just gonna screw up the picture that they're getting, or
Right.
is
Right.
she gonna cause them to like poke something in her brain, and like, ugh, it's really freaky when you think about it.
Yeah, my dad was doing a medical study a couple of years ago, and that required him to do an MRI, and he was in the machine. He's like, it was uncomfortable enough as it was because you can't move, and he's in a really uncomfortable position. Then he said,
Right.
and then my back started to cramp, and I couldn't do anything about it. And so he's laying there in the machine having to keep still while his back muscles are just like twisting, like they're wringing out a rag. And he was like, it's the most uncomfortable I've ever been in my life.
Yeah, Jesus. Ugh.
What do you think of Marin?
Well, I've already explained to you that he reminds me very much of my uncle,
Yes.
so I have a warm feeling towards Marin. I think, well, first I'll say I think Max von Sydow is just such a fantastic actor that
he's
nothing
great.
I
Yeah.
can say is going to be enough. So Marin, the character, has that going for him, that he's portrayed by somebody who's so good at his craft. I really like the character of Marin because he's so separate from the rest of the movie. Like, there's something mysterious about him. Like, why, even though he's a priest, is he out on archaeological digs?
Sure, yeah.
What is it, just academic? Is he looking for specific types of artifacts? Is like, what is going on with that? And
Trying to find
the
one of those
fact that
Pazuzu statues with the giant wangers on them. They don't bring a lot of attention to it, but that Pazuzu statue
they
has
let
a
it
huge
they let
dick.
it speak for itself. Yeah. Did you hear the story? And I have no idea how true this is, but the story that they shipped that statue to they tried to ship it to Iraq and it got lost in the mail.
No.
And it got sent to like Australia or
Oh,
something,
jeez.
and some poor unsuspecting person in customs opened it up. Was just face to face with that giant dong. But I like Marin because of the mystery. I think like they don't come in and give him some sort of tragic backstory. They don't elaborate too much on like, why do they think of him right away when there's potentially an exorcism to be done?
They mention that he has experience with it, because that's basically the only bit of backstory you get on Marin, is that he was involved in an exorcism in Africa or something like 20 years ago.
Right, and you have to assume that it went well if they want him to do it
I
again.
guess, yeah.
Yeah. So like you're
Unless
sort
like
of teased.
Unless the Exorcist is like a weatherman, where it's like, yeah, it only works like 50% of the time, but that's a pretty good ratio for an exorcist.
Yeah, so you're sort of teased out that he has probably had a very fascinating life, but they don't go into it. And I think when you look at him, I think especially coming from like a Catholic background, he's like the sort of priest you would want to have. You know, like if you're going to go and confess to somebody, you want it to be somebody who feels almost mystical in a way. Like you can kind of believe that this person has a special relationship with God. He doesn't feel just like an average person.
Yeah.
So having him come in to do this ceremony gives it more gravitas and impact, I think.
Yeah, I guess they were originally, the studio wanted Marlon Brando to play that character.
Ugh.
But Friedkin said no because he was too much of a presence that it would turn the movie into a Marlon Brando movie.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think Max von Sydow is the perfect kind of actor to bring that gravitas, but he's someone who at that point probably isn't super well known in America. I mean, as we were talking about last night when we were watching it, we couldn't believe he's only 44 here.
The old age makeup in this movie on him is it's so good.
Yeah.
Like, I was convinced that he was in his 70s in the 70s, and when I saw him in a movie in like the 2000s, I briefly believed in immortality. I was just like, how is this man still alive? He's 140 years old.
For 50 minutes you thought there was immortals on the earth.
And I thought Max von Sydow was one of them.
Yeah.
I was ready to believe, because the age makeup in this is so good.
And even
so well done.
I watched it streaming in HD on Amazon on a big screen, and it still looks good. Like there's
Right.
a lot of times that stuff kind of breaks down the illusion for old age makeup, but it still looks really good even still now.
In one of the Blade Runner sequel, I think they put someone in old age.
Prometheus. They
There
put
it is.
Guy Pearce in
There you go. Thank
hilarious old age makeup for no reason.
I'm glad that I had the wrong movie, and I was about to say Jared Leto, which was the wrong actor, and you still got it. You still got me there.
Oh, they did also. Jared Leto is in Blade Runner 2049, but I don't think he's in old age makeup. I think
I
he's
think I'm
just Jared
conflating
Leto. Yeah, that's one of the more baffling choices. Because when you see a younger actor clearly in old age makeup, that means at some point you are going to see the younger version of the actor. But they don't do that in Prometheus. It's just Guy Pearce in old age makeup. And I think I heard somewhere, I don't know if it was on the commentary for that or something, that it wasn't like they had cut some scenes or anything. It was just that Guy Pearce wanted to work with Ridley Scott, and they're like, all right, we'll throw him in this character. What the hell?
Yeah, he'll just make him the old man.
Yeah.
But Max von Sydow does a good job, I think, too, of moving like he's older. Like, he doesn't over-exaggerate it, but there is a certain kind of, I don't know, almost unsteadiness at times where he's trying to like climb the hill on the excavation site, and he seems like he has to kind of be a little more considerate about where he's kind of placing his feet and like how he's doing it. But it doesn't come off as like cartoony. I think it's well done. Right.
Yeah. I guess Friedkin was saying that when he was bringing this, when people were reading the script, the same thing everybody said to him was, well, you're going to cut the Iraq sequence, right? Like everybody, even Blatty was like, I assume we're going to cut the Iraq stuff. And he was like, absolutely not. Because that sets the entire tone for the whole thing. And it also, that scene allows you to not have to explain much about Merrin because you introduce him in that scene too. He's not, feeding you this information about him. It's just there's a general unease about what Merrin's doing and the things he's finding in that weird standoff that he has with the Pazuzu statue, where it's like, okay, something's going on between these two guys. Not really sure what that is.
There's like stray dogs fighting at the foot of the statue, and there's armed guards guarding the excavation site. It's like, okay, something uncomfortable is happening here.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing where when he comes back at the end, you kind of get this sense that he's fighting the demon that he knows, even though they never say that once in the entire. Like, I always got that was always the impression that I got, was like, oh yeah, well, this is the demon from the beginning. So, of course,
Merrin's he's either hunting through the world or has somehow accidentally released, and therefore this is his.
Oh, I never
kind
considered
of duty.
that. Yeah,
I don't know.
He seems like, with all that digging that he does, he might have unearthed some sort of Necronomicon and let Pazuzu out.
Pazuzu.
We should talk about Reagan in her more garish, ghoulish form.
Linda Blair is so good in this.
She is. I don't want to take anything away from her, because obviously her performance is great. Like, especially when they really get her juiced up at the end.
Yeah.
The fact that they got her to do some of that, just like staring off into the distance stuff, is just it's really unnerving.
Right, and I know they eventually use the amazing voice actor for the demon's voice, but she still delivers the lines when they're filming.
Yes.
And I read something somewhere where Max von Sydow was so disturbed by what she was saying that he forgot his line.
It's funny though, because like it really is the sum of all the parts that create the magic. Because I don't know if you've seen the clips of her saying some of those lines without the voiceover, but it's got big Peter Mayhew in the Chewie costume before they put the Chewie noises on top of his voice energy, or like David Prowse saying the Darth Vader lines, because it's always it's like her laying there and just hear, Karis, your mother sucks cocks in hell. And it doesn't have the zip, obviously. And so it's not until you layer on this horribly tortured performance from, almost literally, from Mercedes McCambridge that it all really starts to sing. I guess apparently Linda Blair got nominated for an Academy Award for this. And it wasn't until after she was nominated that the Academy realized that wasn't her. Because I guess Mercedes McCambridge was not credited by her own request on the initial prints of the film. And they just assumed that it was, I don't know, audio trickery or something. But after,
but that it was her voice underneath, Linda Blair's voice underneath it all, yeah.
But apparently it is the procedure of the Academy that they will not rescind a nomination. And so all of that sort of kind of, they're saying one of the reasons why she probably didn't win was because it was like, oh, she's up there, but does she deserve to be up there? You know, that kind of bullshit. But
right. Sort of like if it's a combination, if the performance itself is a combination of different actors, then how do you credit one over the other?
Right. Yeah. But I mean, the stuff that they do with her is still unbelievable. It's the makeup. The makeup is by Dick Smith, who is the master of movie makeup. I think, you know, as great as the people are who came after him, he was Rick Baker's teacher. Dick Smith is like, he was the guy. You know, he did some of the best stuff that's ever been done.
Yeah, because the makeup in this, you know, we were talking about the old age makeup, but the makeup on Reagan, like when Reagan's the demon, it is still disgusting looking. Yeah. And like you were saying, even on the big screen HD TV, like it still looks gross when she's full Pazuzu.
My favorite shots are when her eyes go white are great, and I also love when she's just sort of like writhing around and the green stuff is just like slowly oozing out of her mouth. That's so the best gross. One. Yeah, I love that.
And they get it all over the priest's stole, and they have to like run into the bathroom to do some laundry real quick.
And you know, the thing that's so amazing, or the thing I love about her demon makeup is it is insane and it is intense, but they never really go too far away from her actual features. Like there's the tendency now is to, you know, everybody's got to have these giant brow pieces and really sharp, jagged, demonic looking cheekbones and stuff. And it always kind of takes me out a lot of the times when they do that stuff. But here you can still see Reagan's face. They don't like really distort her cherubic kind of look too much.
Yeah.
And so it really makes it pop.
Right. And it makes it all the more terrifying conceptually, because when you're looking at her, you can still see a little girl in there.
Right,
it's not like just fully this completely grotesque monster with like sharp teeth and extra eyeballs or whatever. It's like, no, she looks really fucked up, but like you can still see her face beneath it all.
Yeah. Do you like the actual exorcism sequence?
I do.
Yeah.
I think it really works well where it's like these two men who are coming at it from very different points of view and who are supposed to be there like to support one another. And I don't mean that like in like the way we use that kind of term now, like I'm here to support you. It's like, no, like
handshakes and hugs, baby. That's all they need.
Right, like Karras actually has a role to play in the exorcism, and he does it poorly.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
He's not good at it. He doesn't have the responses ready. He sort of freezes up at different moments, and Max von Sydow's character is kind of a little bit like, I like, hurry it up, like, you need to get on top of this. This is important. Without saying it like that, it's just in his attitude of like, what are you doing? So I like the interactions between them. I think having Karras in the room is also important because he stands in for the audience, and you get to see him react in kind of shock and horror to what he's seeing the same way you are as the viewer. And yeah, I think all the effects still really work. I think like, yeah, the pea soup just sort of coming out of her mouth, and the levitation and all of that stuff still really freaks you out when you watch it. It's great.
Yeah, and it's so simple. Like most of that stuff is so simply done. A lot of it is the same kind of stuff they do like in magic tricks, like the levitations and stuff like that. It's not $300 million special effects, you know.
Right, and it's not a portal to hell opens in the bathroom and there's like, countless CGI demons and the sky is turning black and a giant hand's reaching down. Like all the sort of like Marvel Disney movie level thing where it has to be like a giant portal.
To be fair, though, this movie could have been improved by a sexy demon lady exploding into blood. Like in the Pope's Exorcist.
Yeah.
Which, if you want to see...
Or, counterpoint, put all the priests on Vespas.
There you go. Yeah, if Marin had rolled up to the McNeil household on a Vespa instead of in that creepy cab.
Oh my God. I hope somebody on the internet who has Photoshop
has anybody
skills
done that? I don't think anybody's done that.
has put the Russell Crowe on a Vespa outline in the Exorcist poster with the fog.
Yeah, that's very good.
Yes.
Pope's Exorcist. Excellent movie. Highly recommend.
That's the double feature everyone should do. Watch this movie, watch The Exorcist, and then watch The Pope's Exorcist.
That would be a pretty great palate cleanser, honestly.
Seriously, yeah.
I do think someone who should have gotten an Academy Award for this movie is whoever the lighting guy was, who was in control of lighting the fog from their mouth, the breath light.
Yeah.
The breath light is A+. They do this amazing thing throughout the movie as things get worse and worse. The color tone starts to get darker and more blue and more icy. Mm-hmm. And so you've got this bit at the end where the room is cold, and they've got one light like just off camera behind Reagan while Marin's kind of over her sort of chanting, and just like all of the steam that's coming out of both of their mouths. It's unbelievable. It's so great. Well, yeah, because
didn't they have to actually just make the room freezing cold?
Yes, they chilled the room down to below 30 degrees, or 30 below. I can't remember. I think it was below zero. Because basically what they would do is they couldn't run the air conditioners and stuff while they were filming. And so they would make the room unbearably cold, and then they would shut the AC off and turn all the lights on, which is going to heat the room back up. So eventually they would have to cool it down again. And I understand that CGI is easier or whatever, but it does not look as good. I think CGI fake breath is some of the worst CGI generally, and it's never as good as when you actually do it like this, or the way they did a similar thing in The Thing as well.
Yeah, totally. It's such a hard thing to fake that yeah, having it it sucks for the actors having
Yeah.
it be like actually -15 in there or whatever, and like, Linda Blair's in a nightgown.
Right.
But it looks so good. That ending, the exorcism ceremony itself, like, is shot so well.
That should be the subtitle of this movie. Should be The Exorcist: It sucks for the actors.
Yeah. Right, well, because didn't like everyone get injured on this film?
Yeah, a lot of people did. One of the things that comes along with William Friedkin is he's the kind of director who's going to do whatever he has to get what he needs, for better or worse. And in this case, involved him firing guns on set to get realistic reactions out of people.
Right.
There's the scene where I think it's after the masturbation scene. I always found it weird that they refer to it as masturbation scene, because it's like, I don't know if that's the word I would use for what she's doing, but
Yeah, I would call it genital mutilation,
Yeah,
considering she's stabbing herself with a crucifix and she's covered in blood.
oh, I forgot. One of the things you'd find, I was going to say the most blasphemous use of the body of Christ since the devil's.
Ooh.
Or is that after this? That might be after this. I can't remember what year that came out. Either way, I think it's the scene where Reagan slaps Chris and she falls to the ground. I guess the way they shot that was they had like a harness on Ellen Burstyn, and then there was a stunt guy or a guy off camera who was pulling her down to really get her to fall hard.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time he didn't like it, so he was like, give her a really good one this time. And I guess she landed wrong and like broke her coccyx and injured her back. And Linda Blair had a back injury because the scene where she's like going up and down really fast, like slamming up and down. She's
laying in the bed and her upper half is like flinging forward and then all the way back and then forward and all the way back really fast.
She was in like a torso harness, and I guess in between takes the harness got loose, so it wasn't super tight, and so it was like it did some real damage to her back, I guess, that in a manner that I think she still has some issues with.
Yeah, poor thing. Jesus.
But yeah, it's one of those movies where it's like, it doesn't surprise me to hear that stuff because the movie feels like that. It is this vibe that comes through in the finished product that is just uncomfortable and scary, and it's scary in a way that not a lot of movies are.
Yeah. My favorite one of those anecdotes is the one you told me about the actual priest getting punched in the face.
Yes. Father Dyer, at the end when he's giving the last rites to Karis, he was not an actor, he was an actual priest, and so they did the scene once or twice, and he wasn't getting the emotion. And so Friedkin took him aside, and these are his exact words. He said, "I said to him, do you love me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I love you, Billy." He's like, "Do you trust me?" He goes, "Yeah, I trust you." And then he leaned back and slapped him as hard as he could in the face. And then he said, "Roll camera." And he said, "Go do the scene now." And that's the take in the movie, is him having just had the shit slapped out of him.
Yeah.
And he nailed it. He got it. Oh,
yeah. He looks so genuinely distraught. And it's like, because his friend just hit him in the face.
Yeah, it's, I that stuff is so fascinating because, like, I don't know. I feel like it's tough to be more outraged by that than the person it happens to. You know what I mean? And if at the end of the day they're like, "Hey, we did it the way we needed to do it, and it looks great," and it's like, well, okay, well, But if you're coming away from it still being like, he should not have done that, I was appalled, then it's like, okay, that's you probably shouldn't be slapping people on the movie set, full stop. But I don't know. Movies are weird.
I'm more bothered by the, like, Ellen Burstyn breaking bones and Linda Blair having back problems for the rest of her life from the time she was like 15 onwards, or how maybe she was actually 12 in this movie.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Then I'm like, that's a bridge too far. I also think you probably shouldn't be slapping people, but I have a feeling that Father Dyer there was okay after getting slapped.
Yeah. I'm not going to advocate for fewer safety regulations and on movie sets. However, there is just a different feeling when you're watching a movie from like the 70s, even into the 80s, where you can just tell it is a miracle nobody died. You know, like,
when you're watching it and you're like, everyone on this film seems genuinely distressed.
Yeah, well, it's just like some of these movies where it's like now I feel like even if a great example of this is they show a lot of these behind the scenes things of the Fast and Furious movies now, where it's like there's this scene where a car flips up onto its side, smashes through the window of a store and out the other window, rolls over and lands and keeps driving. It's like, okay, yeah, CGI, sure. And then they show you the behind the scenes thing, and they actually did it. Like they actually built a rig that would, smash this car through the store, flip it over, and then, could drive away or whatever. And you see the behind the scenes thing, you go, oh, that's really cool. And then you see it in the movie, and they've touched it up and smoothed it out so much with computers that it doesn't feel real at all. And so even when they do this stuff for real, it just doesn't have any weight to it anymore. And so when you're watching these movies from the 70s, like I've been watching these Italian crime movies that all have car chases in them. And I'm sure I've talked about this before.
Yep.
And there's just something about these car chases because you know that they're not faking any of this stuff. They're not using computers. And in these movies, most of the time, they're not even getting permission. And they're just like hitting the road with a camera. They get it and hopefully don't get arrested. And there's something that's just so much more electric about that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to advocate for less safety or anything because obviously that's ridiculous. But I don't know how you can emulate that feel without doing something for real.
Yeah, and I think I really like your point about especially in like the cases where they are doing it for real, but they've touched it up and smoothed it all out and made it look so clean that you just as a viewer assume that it is CGI because there's none of the kind of rough edges that would come with it being like a real car going through a real window anymore. I think that happens a lot in like a lot of the Tom Cruise stuff where he, does all his own stunts and they're all insane and da-da-da. But it's become so easy to fake this stuff with the help of computers that even when you do see it done for real, it feels less impressive because part of your brain is going, they probably did CGI to put that in, or they touched that up. They made that jump look bigger than it was. It's all like kind of computer tricks. And I don't know if you can really come back from that.
I think the one movie that I've seen in the past, 10 years that I legitimately felt that level of excitement and that sort of, ooh, this feels dangerous is Mad Max Fury Road. That's the only one that I've seen where it's like, this feels like those older movies.
Yeah, like this person feels like they are actually getting dragged by a car.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's plenty of tricks in there. There's probably a lot more CGI than you think there is, but for whatever reason, George Miller figured out how to make it have that same level of tension to it that a lot of movies don't have anymore. I love car destruction movies. I love car violence.
We know.
I know. And so much of it.
I think in the end, that's like 90% of the reason we ended up doing most of those Stephen King movies we did for the Patreon last year. Car movies.
And so like you see so much of that stuff is CGI and it just doesn't feel, I think that's what it is like for a long time it was really difficult to fake destroying a car,
Yeah.
But now they can do everything now.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to The Exorcist. What were we talking about?
We were talking about how good the ending exorcism looked.
Yes. Ending exorcism is great. Is there anything else you want to touch on? The only other thing I was going to talk about is that there have been a number of sequels to this movie. There's infamously Exorcist 2, which I've never seen. I do want to watch it. I made the mistake when I was younger of anytime I came across a movie I shot a man in Reno once just to watch him die. No, anytime I come across a movie where someone's like, "Oh, that movie's terrible," or "This is infamously a terrible movie," I would just go, I don't need to watch this then. I regret that almost every time because I always find something interesting about them, and Exorcist 2 is one of those movies that I have yet to actually go back and watch because I know it's an infamously bad movie. And it's got Linda Blair comes back as Reagan. Richard Burton is in it. I don't even know what it's about, but for a long time, another movie that was like, oh yeah, this is terrible, don't even watch it, is Exorcist 3. And I think most people have come around to realizing that Exorcist 3 is fucking great.
So I have to say, I've never seen 2. I only watched 3 like within the last 3 months, and I am obsessed with it.
It's so good.
Like, I don't want to talk too much about it now because I'm tempted to use it as a future wild card because
I think you should, absolutely.
It's batshit crazy and it's so great, and I love it almost as much as I love this movie.
That was one of those movies that I found early on in my exploration from a list of like scariest movie moments, and if you've seen the movie, you obviously know what moment I'm referencing. But
yes, I do.
And so I was very happy to watch that and go like, this is actually pretty great. And I watched that very close, very near to when I watched The Changeling for the first time, which is also a George C. Scott movie and is also awesome. And so it was a back-to-back. It was like I had discovered this whole subgenre of George C. Scott demon movies where he's just like kind of nonplussed and unaffected by these ghosts and shit that are making his life a living hell. It's awesome.
That's awesome.
Who do you prefer as the cop? Lee J. Cobb or George C. Scott? Because it's the same character.
Oh, God. I mean, you got to say George C. Scott. He's just he's so ridiculous and so great. I love him.
Yeah. I guess so. One little bit of interesting trivia, because I can't not bring up Columbo anymore, is that apparently Friedkin...
It's taken over your whole brain.
It really has. Friedkin and Blatty think that Peter Falk's performance as Columbo is drawn from Lee J. Cobb playing the Kinderman in this movie.
Oh.
I don't think that's the case, mainly because... my first instinct was it's not the case because the first the first Columbo story was a play from the late 60s. And so the character existed, and the show had been on the air since 71, I think. And so he was out there as this character.
He's got a beat. However,
Blatty, on his commentary for The Exorcist, talks about how when the book was first optioned, which was in like 1970, I think, maybe 69 or 70, one of the things that he wrote into his contract was that he would retain the rights to explore a television show starring Kinderman, because he was so confident that Kinderman was going to be like this breakout character, sort of this detective who kind of is plays a little bit unassuming and coming off as he doesn't know as much as he actually does. And he thinks that basically the fact that he wanted to hold on to that so much, basically he was saying like, I wanted to hang on to this thing and they let me do it. But then shortly after that, this show Columbo started with a character that was very similar to this character from The Exorcist that this time was the book. And I think it's just one of those coincidences, you know.
Yeah, this feels this feels like a stretch to me.
It's a stretch, like, especially since Peter Falk had been playing that character since 1969 or whatever. But
right, but that is interesting. There's definitely parallels there between those characters.
That being said, would I love to see Lieutenant Columbo in The Exorcist? Absolutely.
Yes.
I would love to see how he would handle this.
I feel like that would be the crossover of your dreams.
The thing in the movie that is 100% a Columbo move is when Kinderman asks Chris McNeil for an autograph. Because Columbo does that all the time. Anytime he's working someone who's famous,
and says it's for his daughter.
Yeah, anytime he's working someone who's famous, he's like very starstruck and always asks for an autograph or something at like the most inopportune time. Or he does this other thing where he tends to ask someone how much something costs, which is really funny. Anyway,
excuse me.
Join me on Columbo Cast. I mentioned they re-released this in 2000 as the Exorcist, the version you've never seen, which had a lot of stuff cut back into it. And I realized as we were watching this last night, I don't know if I had watched it since I had seen that version, because I very clearly remember the ending being after the McNeils drive away, Dyer runs into Kinderman and they kind of strike up a conversation, and Kinderman asks him if he wants to go to the movies, which is followed through, I believe, in Exorcist 3, right? Isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he hangs out with the priest, who I assume is supposed to be the same priest, but
yeah, I think it is. And yeah, they go see a movie together, and they're like bros.
Yeah, I think the ending, the alternate ending spells it out a little bit more, where Kinderman or maybe Dyer has some dialogue about, good triumphing over evil and blah, 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 blah. And I can understand why they cut it if that's the case, because, like I said, this movie spells out nothing for you. And so having it at the end give you a breakdown of what you just witnessed is not in line with this movie at all. And I didn't remember how quickly it cuts, because they drive away and Dyer looks down the stairway, and then he kind of just turns around and boom, out, done.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think I like the ending the way it is.
Yeah.
I like it's sort of like this insane thing happened to these unsuspecting people in this kind of rich suburb of DC, and people died because of it, and then it passed. That it was over, and that means the story's over and it's time to go. And that's it.
Yeah. And I noticed this movie's cut very tight too. Like, they don't spend a lot of time hanging around in scenes. They'll,
Yeah, it sort of gives you like just the bare minimum of like what you need to get what you need to see to get what you need to get out of each scene, and then we move on.
Yeah, because this is about, I think it's just over 2 hours. And I think if you, once you start languishing in stuff or hanging around in scenes, that runtime balloons pretty quickly, I think. So it's very efficiently cut, efficiently paced, and it's just a great friggin' movie. The music obviously is iconic.
It's so good.
Lalo Schifrin, who I believe he wrote the Mission Impossible theme. Famous composer, did a score for the movie that Friedkin rejected. In a very sad story, I guess he and Friedkin were friends, and Schifrin wrote this score for the movie that Friedkin just didn't like and didn't think was going to work. And they apparently had a big falling out over it, and I think Friedkin said, I never talked to him again or something like that, or like that was just the end of their friendship for unfortunate reasons. But
that's a bummer.
Yeah, the score they ended up using is a lot of temp music stuff. Friedkin had layered in while he was cutting the movie and just kind of kept it. I think Jack Nietzsche does some work on it, but of course the standout is Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, which is iconic. I don't think there would be the theme from Halloween without this, because I think they're very similar.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Yeah, and Tubular Bells is one of those songs, kind of like Princes of the Universe, the Queen song from Highlander, that when you actually sit down and listen to the entire song, you kind of like nodding your head along to the part and then you go, huh, when it kicks into the next part of the song, which is very much not what you're expecting it to be. It's a very strange song.
I mean, I was not expecting that to be the song that you brought up.
It's the only other one that I have always at the forefront of my mind, because I still remember, because I knew the Princes of the Universe song from Highlander, and it's awesome. And then I listened to the whole track, and it's like they kind of ran out of ideas halfway through it. and it gets really weird and kind of show-tuney, and it's just not what you're expecting coming off of the hard rock beginning of the Highlander soundtrack. But
Yeah, I'm really glad they didn't get too weird and show-tuning in any of the songs in The Exorcist.
yeah, well, they cut it. Tubular Bells is
They
like
cut it before it does.
yeah, it's a weird kind of experimental electronic music piece, sort of, and they cut it at like right at the perfect point to keep the creepy part, but not get the weird stuff.
Yeah.
And the other bit of trivia about Tubular Bells is it is the record that made Virgin Records. It was Virgin Records' first huge release, and basically allowed that company to take off literally, and become the gigantic corporation that it is today. So,
Yay.
The Exorcist. Placement on the list. Deserved, or should it be higher? Lower, or taken off the list completely?
I'm kind of insulted you're even asking.
I know.
I mean, I think this should be top 10, definitely.
Yeah.
Top 5, probably. Like, I'm willing to be argued that it shouldn't be number 1,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it should be damn close.
Just in case anyone needs a refresher, the top 10 are A Quiet Place, The Invisible Man from 2020, Night of the Hunter, Nosferatu from 1922, King Kong, Alien, Us, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Get Out, and Psycho.
Look, I have nothing against any of those movies,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority of them I do not think belong in the top 10 greatest horror movies of all time.
No, A Quiet Place being at number 10 is unhinged.
Yeah.
The movie's fine.
I understand A Quiet Place being in there more than the Invisible Man.
Yeah, I would say that as well. Yeah, and Quiet Place and
Yeah.
Invisible Man probably a little bit overhyped in this particular list.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously this is iconic and one of the. I mean, it's one of like 2 movies on this list that were nominated for an Oscar. You know, the other being Silence of the Lambs, I think.
Which is also an amazing movie.
Yes. Yeah, unless you have anything else you want to say about The Exorcist before we sign off.
I mean, I feel like I know there was an entire podcast series done on just this movie. So I feel like by necessity have just glossed over so many different things and side characters and so much nuance and stuff that I'm sure we did not talk about.
We didn't talk about the fact that I'm continuously confused at the use of the word cunting. I didn't know, is it an adjective? Is it a verb? I don't know.
Look, I think it's supposed to be an adjective. In this context, we would have to find a Brit or an Aussie and ask them, because I'm not qualified.
You're not going to make your aunt happy until you say the word, okay?
And that's why I'm not going to say it. Good night, folks.
Anyway, I hit the randomizer button. Beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, boop, boop. And next up, we are getting weird. We have number 170, David Cronenberg's Videodrome.
Oh, okay. That is a tonal shift.
Yes, quite a bit. Although another movie where at the end they didn't really know what the hell the ending was going to be. So, similar in that regard.
Which I understand more for Videodrome than I do for this movie because,
Yeah.
yeah.
Long live the new flesh.
It's a weird fucking movie.
But yeah, I think that's going to do it for us. I think you're right, though. I think you could talk about this for hours and hours if you wanted to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But thank you guys for listening. If you want to help support the show, you can head over to patreon.com/thepensky-file and follow along with us as we go through the Video Nasties list this year. Amanda and I are covering films off the infamous Video Nasties list. In August, we are doing Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse. We've done Mario Bava's Bay of Blood. We've done Possession. We've done, Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. All sorts of good stuff in there. So check that out. And and if you like comic books, I have a comic book on the shelves right now called Batman White Knight Presents Generation Joker. So pick that up. Be much obliged. And I think that's it. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.